film had to not run smoothly. So, yes. So, thanks a lot. Marta, Dauliūtė, is a film director and producer based in Stockholm. Together with Elisabeth Marjanovic Kronvoll, who also did the camera here in that film. You run the film production company MDEMC. In addition to directing and producing short and feature documentaries, you're co-organizer of Non-Citizen, a nomadic film project. Viktorija, Šiaulytė, you're an independent curator and filmmaker based in Berlin. You're founder and co-curator of Videograms, a festival and platform for artist films and videos in Vilnius. You're currently a research affiliate at the Art, Culture and Technology program at MIT. The film had been based on a multi-year research in 2019 at Transmediale. You already presented excerpt and organized a whole discussion session around it. And there are also certain elements coming together. So it's a lot about this startup world and different startups. And then you zoom in on the Tech Farm project. Could you give us a little insight into that process, how it evolved, how maybe along the way of developing, you always had, of course, at the final product, the idea of the feature-length documentary. So along that way, how it evolved and might get diverted, or these two things from the main parts, even including then the sort of expropriation, tenants movements in Berlin and so forth, how that came together.
Maybe I'm like really tired, sorry. I woke up really early today, but I can start and then maybe you can add. I think the way we started, we became very interested in this kind of, at the time it was very hyped, in like 2014 maybe or 13, this whole entrepreneurial scene and startup scene in general, like this, you know, kind of belief in neoliberal promise. And then we became very interested in this flexibility and efficiency, you know, like, and we kind of narrowed down, and I got interested in these startups that work with this, like making products out of that, or kind of entrepreneur as a product in itself somehow, like creating all these services for them. So that's why you see this on-demand, you know, job market and sales force and so on. And then in this research, we found this co-living place, which was at the time also something really new, and I don't know, even in Europe, I think not so much, was kind of one of the first ones maybe. And we thought, like, through like this also very long-term, not only research, but also editing process, we kind of saw that there's something very, like one thing like that unites all these startups, which I think we didn't expect, you know, in advance to find, but that's what we found in the process, is the way they approach community. And then like this co-living startup, we thought that's like, you know, it's like so metaphorical on so many levels, and because it's so much more extreme than all the other ones. Even the other ones are quite extreme and what kind of lifestyle they push, but the co-living space, you know, it opens up so many very existential questions as well. So that's why we decided to kind of frame, you know, the film by entering there, and then kind of the next to last chapter is also coming back to Tech Farm.
You covered up everything. No, but it's also was interesting when I was watching now, and also listening to Keynote before by Orit, and then it's like some things they are really time document already somehow. A certain enthusiasm is also almost a time document already. I mean, you cannot, yeah, they are established now in another way. But this type of enthusiasm and this type of something was new, and we tried to grasp like the guy who is explaining what is gig economy. Everything was, all these notions were like what is this narrative and what is it pushing? It's really, yeah, it's strange how fast things got established in a way.
You have an idea how they lived through the pandemic in the pods?
No.
Sweden didn't have any harsh regulation.
One thing I find fascinating is I mean, you talk a lot about something like when you talk about this control power with the discussion you have with the entrepreneur at the table, and then you talk about this control coming from within, which is something like it's like the Freudian superego. So it's not something new actually, then they talk about your boss is your app. So it's almost like you have like outsourced your superego to an app. And it's like strange, because this really made me think about, this is more like a reflection and a question maybe, but it just made me think that this kind of control, this kind of superego is always in a certain sense like a technological thing, that it's always something that that is this pressure towards the future, that is always there in technology, you know, like, yeah. But I was thinking about, I was wondering about this, your decision to include yourself in the film. You want to speak a bit about that?
I think it was important through the whole film, and also in the way that we developed criticality in the film. It was also somehow important to have some kind of gentle skepticism towards the people somehow, because it also, like in the final result, the way we present it, and it was also, there was so many things we recognized, the way this also works on us, and some kind of identification also when we went to the space, to the tech farm space. It was also, as you say nicely, Victoria, it works on so many levels, and one of the levels it worked on, we could also recognize our own body in this economy there. So somehow to not completely like look from a side, but to see how, I don't know, there was how to formulate this as a discussion together somehow. And there was also this wish with this entrepreneur Gustav, who also from the beginning lived in this previous very little prototype house before the tech farm, before they started upscaling. Yes, yeah. It was also, it was some kind of really wish to try to share a critique with him. So this process, I mean, we show like, you know, you know how many hours we have, how many times we met and we were reading, but it's also just a little excerpt. But that's kind of wish to share the critique with the ones who are almost in the same position economically. That was some kind of sincere wish to do that.
No, I find it's, I mean, it's really interesting that it actually constitutes the very first image, you know. First what we see is the both of you. And you establish that relationship, which is like, for a classic documentary, it's a no-go, you know, because you're supposed to disappear and show objectively what's there in the world, and you have no impact on that. You don't intervene, which is, of course, never true. And but then, as you say, like also, what does that have to do with us? You know, and she's talking about the resident and facility or community manager. I want to be this digital nomad, and I want to franchise the startup because then I can go to Bangkok and be there for a while and so on. So artist residencies are not that different, you know, and also how you talk about your struggle with efficiency and so forth, I mean, has a lot to do. But I think there's really, of course, major difference, and I find it only honest how you struggle with that also, to position you there, and how you can also not really articulate it in that moment when you're asked back, right? And but what I find interesting in what you said now with the app is your boss, but now it really occurred to me that these models of the new startup or the on-demand or the task runners, these are super age-old ideas, you know, like that's really a working class reality as unskilled laborers. Like now, you received the job on the app, and in the early days here, and probably in so many places of this world, you just wait at the street corner that you might be picked up to the next construction site, you know? So it just wraps that into a new product. So it's very, relates also well to Todd McGovern's introduction yesterday. So how that also needs to be the old thing wrapped in a new thing to get, keep capitalism driving. And the tech farm is something new, but also, if we look at the countercultural movements of the 1960s, the communes, drop city, and so forth, I mean, intentional or conscious co-living is not something new, right? And so, but maybe you can articulate that, what makes that different, and I mean, certainly you were busy with that, you know, I mean, this type of community it creates, but can you put that in your words now again? So what you see the major difference from these intentions. Also what I found here so interesting and again puzzling is how spiritual it is as well. The inner peace, find your inner self. It's the same, yeah, same slogans in a way, you know, but with the neoliberal thing there's somewhere else. Could you just, or what's your reflection on that?
I think the main difference is really governance. And that's maybe what was our main job with the film, you know, to kind of uncover actually how this, you know, it looks very horizontal, very spiritual, as you say.
Family.
Self-organized, whatnot, but yeah, to really like look at this hierarchy and like who's, you know, benefiting from what and like who's exploiting whom. Yeah, and that's probably, I think that's like the key difference is that it's not a leftist collective.
And also we talked a lot about the software, this program of self-developing, how to manage yourself in the VUCA world. And it's like an anecdote, but you put it so nice, Victoria. Once it's when they are talking, when this program is trying to like, they are telling like, Maslow actually wrote that it's not self-actualizing, it's self-transcendence. So it's like this next level of what you say, spirituality, or what you see there. But it's so strange when there is, as you, Victoria, were joking, it's not like we thought it's about the neoliberal subject, but in the end it's like a no subject. It's like this transcending subject in the, like, that brings into transcending yourself through giving away yourself. So.
Is this also like the reason why you? Because one could imagine this film taking place only in the tech farm, like, and then there is a moment when you return to that moment often with the guy sitting in the investor. So I guess that's the reason why you sort of, so to say, exit the space there, because you need to somehow show this hierarchy there. Because I mean, it's one moment where it's very funny somehow when he talks about. He talks about the fact that this is an old way of thinking, that you need so much space, but he's sitting actually like in an enormous apartment. Yeah.
Of course.
But I think I don't know. I was watching now also. I like kind of I don't know which time already this film, and I was thinking that it's such an interesting combination of privilege and exploitation with all these people. You know, you clearly see they are all rather privileged, all these young entrepreneurs, but then for us to go out of the tech farm and like focus for a while on this on-demand startups was to kind of understand like the hierarchies within this, you know, entrepreneurial scene. So, okay, which entrepreneurs actually exploit other entrepreneurs, or like, you know, these micro entrepreneurs.
The micros.
So the same, yeah, maybe, you know, to kind of show that in this co-living space, it's kind of the same a bit, you know, you have the CEO and like the management, and then you have all these wannabe entrepreneurs who are so, you know, who is selling this promise to whom? yeah, and I guess we needed to go around and see more that it's quite systemic somehow how it functions.
But it's interesting that then there's the argument or the reluctance to say, okay, I don't want the community separated from the company, right? So, because that's all one blob, or so she says, no? And but then, of course, the rents. Why could you not afford? So in this, I mean, you don't elaborate on, or you didn't ask how much do you actually pay, but it sounded logic to her, okay, you might not be able to afford it. Yeah. Are there any comments, questions? Please join us. Maybe there's also one in the chat, I don't know. Saskia's checking. We have this microphone cube that's thrown at you. Russ.
You can talk.
Want a chance to hold this thing, actually. I'm just curious, Marta, you were talking about this sort of datedness of the material in a way. I'm just wondering if you could talk about what you're working on now, either of you or both.
Nothing new.
No? Okay.
there is still so much job to be done with this.
Sure.
You've been on Plattformer Austria, you were interviewed by Benny Gerdes, and Marta, at one point there you say, another curious aspect is that the startup receives funding as a research project by the Innovation Foundation of the Swedish state. So there's this government-funded research trial to decrease the space by increased self-development or increased well-being. That also quite reappears in your interview there. These workshops are there in a way to justify the research project. So there's state funding in there. Can you expand a bit on that construct?
I can try. I think it was like quite concrete. It was about €1 million that the state gave as an innovation grant. As a lot of startups, they formulate this as experiment or prototype, and then it's also a bit funny in a way because architecturally you wouldn't be allowed to rent out this space as an apartment because there is not enough light or window. There is no window, so people don't have. I mean, it's because it's a research project, so it's quite a smart way to walk around this whole thing. Yeah, so it's
not even legally, I think, a residential. You know, they pay membership, so it's not that they have residents legally.
Then it's not really sustainable. I mean, at one point they need to legalize it, or
they're
will it
working
be a
with the
permanent
regulators. That's the whole point. You know,
experiment?
it's some kind of legitimizing mechanism, I guess.
and inviting like different politicians into the space and have meetings. So they're also pushing it somehow as a prototype somehow.
Well, there's a question here from in the internet, from Tobias on the internet, or Tobias, which maybe ties in a little bit about your point about spirituality. He asks, why do you think these neoliberal ventures feel so, perhaps paradoxically, connected to Buddhism?
Yes, I guess self-transcendence, maybe, I don't know. But I wanted to add, I think with this self-leaders, this last session, that's like one of the things, for me at least, was very unexpected to find this. Because if we went to kind of explore this entrepreneurial subjectivity, and this hyper-individualism, I don't know, I've been, I guess, before starting to film, like I've been reading a lot, you know, like, oh, like neoliberal, like capitalism, you know, it's so individual above all and so on. And then we come here and then it's some kind of new, it's like a plot twist that, yeah, you have to believe yourself somehow, you have to transcend yourself in this company. So yeah, maybe that's the connection with Buddhism, but I'm not an expert on Buddhism, so I cannot say.
All right.
Whoa. I wanted to hold this too, but thank you for your film. It was great. And suddenly I was like, whoa, I should have mentioned VUCA. I was wondering actually if you're doing more, you kind of ended in the, well, one, you posed a really interesting question about collectivity. Because one of the things, at least for me, studying neoliberal thinking, and particularly around people like Hick, is they have the fantasy that we actually don't think alone. That markets, coordinate markets are collectivities. Like, that's why the state can't decide. That's why people can't decide. It's because we have to join in groups and do this. So this has kind of left me with an impasse, being like, I guess I'm a neoliberal. No, well, but I was wondering, because at the end you kind of posit that collectivity against this protest, this collectivity around this current issue around activism against Google and Amazon, partially that's been successful. Google is not located in Berlin, or not. I mean, I don't know. I guess I was wondering, one, if you're doing more work with that, and like sort of more, like, are you looking more, like, are you looking at these protests? Are you looking at other forms of collective?
Yeah, at the time, I think at the time, maybe we were like, we had actually residency at Wilhelm Flusser Archive and Transmediale. And at the time, there was these protests were taking place, and we're like, really, we went to some meetings of this Google campus, which was a bit, I don't know, it had some issues. We were not so accepted easily. But yes, but I think in the film, I don't know if Marta would agree, somehow it was important to, because they live in this bubble, you know, in the startups, so we're like looking away, like how do we take this out, you know, of that bubble of their universe and of their narrative, and which it was like a lot of tryouts. And one thing is also to represent, you know, this ambition to grow endlessly, so we wanted to kind of create this confrontation a bit at the end, like this, to show that they have still this ambition to, you know, be in 100 locations, or like these fantasies, you know, like we'll produce pods in China and they will be shipped, and yeah, some kind of fantasy of global efficiency.
Well, just as a note, IKEA actually did start with refugee camps, and they actually are shipping pods. And they actually started with Skoda, Skanska, another Swedish corporation, and they are actually creating these off-the-shelf, ready-to-make, like perfectly parametricized homes based on their ideal of a family. I guess it was like one mother with 2 kids, I don't know, with particular logistical constraints. So they actually are doing it.
They're also green, right? They're supposed to be green, so
yes,
like solar
of course,
panels.
it goes without saying. Everything's green. Like the green is like there. So just as a small note, as I was telling my Roz as I was watching, I was like, they're actually doing this, and yeah, they've won even design awards for the refugee camps.
Already you had
just to add extra fuel to your fire.
Yeah.
I mean, not
already you had been talking about the smart city. What we also have here is the smart home, or the intelligent home. I mean, in the moment he then speaks to Alexa and says we can measure the moisture, and it's so obvious. You put the action cameras on their heads, and then they go into their pods, and there's no space but for your laptop and the mobile phone. So nothing else could you as personal material. So this radical reduction of private space, and of course in favor of a collective space, which is then the space of, let's say, the mining of the creativity, because there you're permanently 24/7, you have to be on, creative, network, you know, that's the big promise of the whole thing, is this networking. It's gonna make you a successful leader and entrepreneur. Even in the sauna, you need to take the Post-it with you. So this I find quite puzzling, how that kind of plugs in to this smart living thing and our new relationships to the digital devices, and in a way that conditions each other, in a way.
And what's the role of the body? I think that's why we chose to use action cameras, is somehow to, how do we show this as embodied experience somehow. But I'm like, just remembered now, what was this Spanish startup? No, we also once looked, it was kind of very funny, like in relation to what you say. I think they were like, even without any like big marketing narratives, like, yes, you can get like a bed, there's a plug, a socket, and Wi-Fi. There's just like two things you need, like bed, Wi-Fi, and the electricity socket.
And we excluded it from the material, but there was also part where they were explaining about the mindfulness bell that goes off every certain now and then. So there's a mindfulness bell in the pod that you can adjust how often you want it to go off. And then the guy continued, like, and then we also will see when you enter the pod, when you are out of the pod for electricity reasons and so on, but suddenly there is this monitoring layer that comes.
All the data is collected in there too, yeah.
Thank you. You just sort of mentioned, my question was sort of on how their efficiency for their innovations, their ideas, maybe if that was tracked, or if we see one of their family meetings, if there's an accountability on their sort of work on their idea. You just mentioned this bell that came on and the chime, but yeah, if there were other methods of how they were tracking their own productivity, or the unit tracked it.
No, I don't think there is, but for us, of course, it was just interesting, just this notion that there is this company that employs you somehow, gives you access, and then that you can actually be sacked out of the family. So that it's there hanging, but then how it works on the residents, I don't know. Really.
But also the self-leadership program that you see, it is, as I understood it, it's part of this research project. And that was going on like for half a year. It was by choice, not compulsory for the residents. But I think that included then, you know, that research project meant that researchers from KTH, if I would do interviews with residents and so on. So if you are asking about data collection, somehow they were also used as a test subjects, I guess, in a way, through that program.
But how did you feel did you feel that the distinction was there between your own lives and their lives, in sense of them being like, you are artists traveling around like nomads, and like you're also some kind of entrepreneurs of your own lives?
At that time there was not so much distinction when Melinda was saying, I don't know what I will do 3 months from now or 1 month from now. Right in the eye, as you say.
No, I think it's really late, and we've had lots of input this first festival day, and more to go. But what I found interesting also in what Benny Gerd is associated with, that there is a feel of a prison to it, right? It's like they live in cells, and then you have long corridors, and you have these designated collective areas. And so is that something that's, yeah, how did that feel to you, or did that come up? And how you think it's, to what extent that represents a certain entrepreneurial aesthetic? Is that only IKEA? Because I tried to also discern that and look at what are they using? How does it look? What aesthetic that really is? What do they eat? And so on, you know? Is that, could you say that there is a sort of entrepreneurial aesthetic in there? I mean, or how, what is that? I mean, you've went so many times and saw all these interiors, just in terms of a design perspective on that, maybe you could, in order to wrap.
I don't know, maybe it's like good place to talk about these 3D visualizations. I don't know if that you could call entrepreneurial aesthetic. It's kind of very, you know, it's very outdated actually as a designer to use this SketchUp, this very, you know, basic kind of modeling software, as far as I know. And then, yeah, that's why we kind of got inspired to produce these additional 3D animations, because we thought that's like very special corporate gaze, you know, to space. It's kind of, I don't know, very simply, it's like in some kind of abstract void. You don't see any context, you know, what kind of figures they use, like how they draw it. So, I don't know, is that, could you call that entrepreneurial aesthetic?
Thanks so much. The conversation here, by the way, is really interesting. There's a lot of things that you are all bringing out from this film, which is an amazing document. But I'm wondering, in the context of like an art festival, if maybe it's like a bit of a scary thing to say, but if you think about the history of art inside of the capitalist era, there's always this ideal of the artist and what the artist is, and I think that when the struggles against monotony in labor struggles through the 20th century, like seemed to come to some kind of fruition, it has been a lot through emancipation of monotony, and I think that somehow the ideal that comes from like the artist's life and like being an artist and like self-realization. Of course, there's the self-transcendence there that comes as a strange additional layer. But anyways, being like this, I mean, that's also like slightly a bluff in a way, but that's maybe a different conversation. But I find that there is something about like being an artist which has replaced a lot of other ideals, strangely enough, even though it was like an outsider position, let's say 100 years ago, and it becomes like the position, and that maybe there is something we need to question about like this fantasy as well that comes within like art production. And it's not just that the internalization of a neoliberal sort of ideology is some foreign issue, but it's actually, like you talk about it a lot, Marta, and you too, Viktorija, in this, that like, what is this fantasy about like this shared, like, you know, economy, and what is this like, yeah, this internalization? Maybe it is a little bit relevant to think also about the dream of the artist not being sort of tied up in any real social like responsibility, but you know what I mean? That it's like replace like a social or public life with a fantasy of this realization, and that sort of drives a lot of things. It's very sort of helpful for this type of economy that we're in, that we carry around that fantasy. I'm definitely not, this job that I have, I am actually an artist. And that way you're never involved in a labor struggle. You're always, it's just something that I do to make money. You know what I mean? As basically a comment, sorry, this guy does a question.
But what would be the, I don't know, is that like artist placement group? There are like interesting experiments, like of artists being in society, but yeah, maybe it's a separate discussion.
Yeah, but I wonder if
point that we have to maybe reshift.
Yeah.
Reference point.
I just as an answer to that, I wonder if this idea of the group really actually replaces that at all. It just becomes an individual anyways, like, or a band, you know, whatever, the band name. I don't really see that sort of changes the paradigm as you talk about in the film. But yeah, it is maybe a different discussion. Yeah.
No, I think certainly, and that is something that, I mean, artist is this auto-entrepreneur, and there had been also lots of scholarship about that, saying that creates the model for the neoliberal subject, and the Ich AG in German, so, you know, that you're fully responsible for what you do. There's no separation of work and leisure time, so it's all 24/7, and it's your auto-creation and all that. So that reappears in that language here and in terminologies. But I mean, we learned this year very greatly, I think, through Documenten, so that, of course, I mean, there is so much collectivity in artistic practice, and but then a totally different one, you know, because this is a different share idea here, and it's as you described, it's exploitation, and it's you know, it's in this entrepreneurship that is just you could not separate from, and but yeah, I think it's not so easy to distinguish, and that also probably keeps troubling you, and you feel it in the film, that it's not resolved, or say like, okay, I have nothing to do with this, my practice is something totally detached, but that makes it also strong, because very honest about this, and then it puts you also back on the audience to get you busy with that in the similar way. All right, 1 minute I've been shown, so this I used to announce the next day, because we're going to be up here again in the Platform City panel, as we said, tomorrow at 3:15, being joined by Sarah Kim and Ross Exo-Adams to further expand or open it up to a discussion around Platform City. And but tomorrow the festival continues. At 11, the exhibitions open at Impact Center at Steenweg 26. And here in the main hall at 12 o'clock with a keynote by Linda Hilfling, Rita's daughter, lessons in crisis computing. So where we look at global infrastructure, computational infrastructures, and what's behind it in order to maintain it. And we also reappears that whole issue of the crisis, and we're going to discuss, and I really liked your project, Orit, against disaster or catastrophe. So that deals a lot also, we deal with that tomorrow and pick that up. But for now, good night, sleep well. After another drink at the bar we want to have and share with each other. Thanks, Erik, Marta,
Thank you
Viktoria.
so much.